Good evening, colleagues. Welcome to our session. And sorry for the delay. We're supposed to start at 6 o'clock. We are 5 minutes late. Welcome to our session. My name is Sediko Rakolote, the founder and the trustee of Progressive Socio-Economic Investment Institute. It is a trust, which is a public benefit trust. One of the programs that the trust is doing is to host webinars to discuss various topics related to socio-economic activities and also politics. Tonight we'll be discussing on a topic that has got an international, that has created an international interest. Some days ago, the Americans went to the elections to elect their president. And as it stands, they've got president-elect. And there's been some discussions across the globe, in particular Africa, on how is USA going to relate with Africa during the tenure of the current president-elect. We decided to organize a webinar and get one of the experienced speakers around the issues of politics and international relations. He is a professor at University of Johannesburg. I'm not going to take long in reading his credentials, but I can just say he's highly experienced and he's a well-known scholar around the issues of politics and international relations. Our presenter tonight is Dr. Siphamandla Zondi, Prof Siphamandla Zondi. Like I said already, he is at University of Johannesburg, focusing on politics and international relations. We are going to have 1 hour of engagement on this topic, the US-Africa relations during Joe Biden's tenure. How is going to be the relations now between the US and Africa under this new administration that is coming in January 20th, 2021. Without a waste of time, I'll hand over to Prof Siphamandla Zondi. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much, my brother, Sediko. And thanks so much for the Institute as well for convening this conversation. I hope to stimulate a conversation so that we all discuss together, because there is no one who has the ultimate wisdom on these issues. We've all been watching the same things. All of us watched, and all of us took a view on this or that, and all of us will have to deal with the consequences of what has happened. So I thought I would use 4 questions to discuss this topic. The first question is whether the US election have a bearing on South Africa. Whether these elections that are taking place, by the way, they have not concluded because they're still counting in some areas. There's still certification to happen in some areas. But those who know statistics have just told us that there is an outcome which is unlikely to change even with the counting happening, which is why they have decided that they think that Biden has won. We will see whether that's the case. Whether this election has a bearing on us, I see a bearing in a number of areas. One is the spectacle of an election involving over 150 million people in over 50 states or more. The spectacle of that happening at different times, because the United States is is subject to different timelines. One side is sleeping, the other side is awake. The spectacle of a management of elections, which is managed at state level, and in some cases, there are elements of county level, or what we call district in South Africa, district level of management, and a situation where states are run by different parties, and these parties have a very huge bearing on what happens, and all the mistrust, and all of that. And it's a spectacle of the political drama. The spectacle of a very dominant president who's been around for a long time, who's around for the past 4 years, and has, in that very short time, impacted the United States and impacted our view of the United States in very deep ways, and have impacted the world in very big ways. He cannot be criticized for lacking courage of conviction. When he's convicted by something, he goes for it. He's very entrepreneurial. He's very transactional in his foreign policy. He's very much in your face. What he says is usually what he believes. Unlike establishment politicians who tell you what you like and appear to you the way you want to lie, you want to be. They're careful about revealing their true self all the time. Like a very managed politics. We had a person who came from outside politics, came into politics, disrupted a lot of things, and got that. And in the run-up to elections, we saw that particular character in the midst of a terrible COVID-19 pandemic. He was defying all the odds. He himself got infected and then recovered from it almost miraculously within 2-3 days. And he was already on a campaign trail, and the campaign trail had people out of there, no social distancing and stuff. At the same time, he was making presentations about how to follow the protocols and stuff, that particular drama. And the drama on the other side of an opposition that had not learned in 4 years how to oppose a guy of this nature. Democrats did not quite know how to deal with a politics unusual, an impolitic politics, a politics that's not like politics. More politics is very middle class, very nicely fashioned, with people who speak very nice words, very cultured, very well-mannered and stuff. That's the politics we know, which is kind of conjured up, and it's also managed, stage managed, had not known how to deal with this. So they had their primaries, we watched the primaries and competing and stuff. So the spectacle of the US election was a beautiful thing to watch. It was a nice thing, pastime, helped us to look away from a terrible condition of COVID-19. But secondly, there was amusement related to that, which is being drawn to very specific things about how that system works. We got to know how those who did not know, got to know how the primaries work. Those who did not know got to know why important different states are, what are small states that but have significant influence, what are big states that have limited influence, what are swing states. We now know about Philadelphia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. We now know about Wisconsin, we know about Ohio, we know about these and Georgia, of course, and all of those. Now we know about this, and Florida. All the states that are about 7 critical states that are very important to know. We now know it. It's almost like we live in the US, where we know about. Thirdly, I think it has a bearing on us in relation to debates and views in relation to democracies and how we think democracies. I've watched people getting amused and really surprised, sometimes shocked, that in the US, they could be having the same debates that we've had over here. Reliability of the voting system, integrity of the electoral officials, about whether we can trust the results of the election, allegations of fraud, possibility of stealing an election. So that drama, which many think associate with countries that are new in this game called democracy, liberal democracy, now plays out in one of the oldest democracies. So the vagaries of a democracy in an old democracy was very useful for us. At least it disabused from us the idea that there are established democracies and there are democracies that are still growing, and that the things that we see in what is called nascent or growing democracies are particular to those democracies. We now know that the many uncertainties, the many tensions, the many fluctuations, the many conflicts and tensions and stuff are actually basic to this democracy, whether you are a very old, 300 years old democracy, or you are a 20-year-old democracy. It's just how the democracy itself tends to play itself out and stuff like that. And therefore, what you have right now with one side declaring itself, if it was in Africa, everybody would be criticizing Biden for reading a victory speech before the counting happened. Can you imagine if in South Africa somebody said, okay, we know. It's almost obvious the results are going to come. We know which way it's going to come. President Ramaphosa is now giving a victory speech while the counting happens for the next 3-4 days. We will all be shocked. It happens. It is happening right now in the United States. Imagine if, say for example, the leader of the opposition in this case, in South Africa, for example, if Malema thought there are disputes with regard to the elections in Limpopo, the elections in KZN or in Free State, and then decide that they will go to the courts to do that, and that they will all be lambasted. It's very unpatriotic. How do you challenge the results of an election? Why do you go to courts for this thing? You are a sore loser. We will say something is strange with those kinds of people. But in the United States, it's happened. So we're more advanced than them in that case, because we would allow a process of people seeking legal recourse in order to clarify and satisfy themselves that the results are fine and fair. But in the US, it looks like the level of intolerance, that bipartisanship, where you are either a strong Republican or a strong Democrat, leaves no room for reasonable people in the middle. So it's almost tribal. The political constitution is almost tribal. You belong to a Republican Party or a Democratic Party as if like it's a tribe that you belong to. Fourthly, we saw also another bearing it has on us is views on parallels. Certain things that are parallel to ours and that are parallel to them. A view that an election which includes two major parties guarantees better democracy. It was shown not to be the case. Sixth is the lessons. There were lessons to be drawn. So that the bearing in the sense of the lessons to be drawn in relation to things they cannot do well and things they can do well and things we can do better than they do. So there's a lot of lessons we are learning in there, and lessons are not one way. Lessons are both sides. And lastly, we are also learning a lot about what the policy positions are. Perhaps less than we learn about the spectacle and the drama and all that. We got to know who stands for what, a little bit, especially from the presidential debate. But the elections is not really too much about issues, but it's about tribal belongings, anti-Trump or pro-Trump. It's really kind of emotional and kind of a basic politics, not very advanced politics. And that is what you get to learn. Whereas in our case, it will be big issues about economic transformation. Those issues will be big. In their case, not as much. The second question I wanted to raise is, did the election of Trump in 2016 bearing on some answer is that's my figure. Is that in many ways the bilateral structure of the relationship, the programs that go with it, the initiatives that go with it, the PEPFAR, which is the mechanism for US support to our health system maintained. So all the bilateral programs remain the same. The relationship actually really remained the same in terms of cooperation that has already been happening. But what ended was dialogue. There was no political dialogue between South Africa and the US of a serious nature. Took a long time to have an ambassador, partly because the Democrats also slowed down the process of Trump's appointment of this, appointment of that. Though right now they can sound like the holy cows, but they played in a negative game to block things. So there was no dialogue between the countries. So there was no opportunity then to identify new things that they needed to do together to move things a little further. There was no political dialogue, that's what I mean. But administrative dialogue remained. Government to government, department to department, it remained. There was very little cooperation outside bilateral relations. Actually, no cooperation outside cooperation. So at the G20, at the WTO, at the UN, cooperation completely declined. Of course, cooperation with the US in those areas is always low. It doesn't matter who is the president, whether it's Clinton, whether it's Obama, whether it's Bush, it's always low. So what that tells you is that there's very little bearing the election of Trump had on Africa, had on South Africa. Now, contrasted, if you look at what we could ask, did the election of the first Black president, Obama, change these dynamics? I would say the same thing. The bilateral program that was started by George Bush continued under Obama. The initiatives continued. The structure of bilateral relationship continued. But what did exist was a level of dialogue, but it was not a president to president, neither was it at deputy president to deputy president. Remember that at the height of our dialogue, it was at the deputy president level, and it was under Republicans. Under Republicans with a very high level dialogue with the US. Under Democrats, the ones we like, who are nice and smiling and good and appearing good to us, we actually had lower levels of dialogue than we had before. But there were new initiatives like the Obama Youth the initiative and other things. But in reality, the relationship did not change that much. The US under Obama, like under Bush, still saw Africa through the security eye, part of the war on terror, militarization of the African continent, security support, and stuff like that. Under Trump, though those things continued, perhaps with much less energy, we were happy that Trump did not take Africa too seriously, because it would have intensified all of those problematic parts of the US there. It was better to be ignored by a monster than to be loved by a monster. And that is the implication I'm going to draw with regards to Biden, who would love us. Love us with what agenda? Love us with what interest? Did South Africa and Africa's interests change under Obama? No, as I indicated. And then the last question is, will then the election of Biden have a significant bearing on South Africa? My sense is that the foreign policy outlook will remain the same as we saw under Bush and Obama, especially. And Trump, of course, did not have much outlook, so not much. Definitely there will be a change from hostility to some element of dialogue, especially in global affairs. But there would not be a lot of convergence of views and agreement on a number of things. The US strategic interest will remain the same. The US lens on Africa will remain the same. How the US sees South Africa as a competition, as a site of competition with Russia, a competition with China, instead of relating with us for our own sake, will continue. What is likely to be a small little difference is that at least we will be smiling and hugging each other. And perhaps as part of smile and hugging and dialogue, there is a possibility of fashioning something new out of this relationship. It might be called a pessimistic view, but it's actually a realistic view, because presidents do not author US interest. US interests already pre-exist. They simply decide how to address them. In the US's interest, Africa is a site for fighting for its global power and global significance. Secondly, and therefore, it is a site where it fights the other global powers, especially Russia and China. That is it. And thirdly, for fighting the other enemy of theirs, which is what is called Islamic terrorism. So they see at a site for that. And then lastly, they see at a site for their soft power. What is soft power? Is to give us some goodies here and there, give us some aid here and there, and never assist us to improve industrial development so that we are independent fully, so that we are able to play our role that we need to play in the world. And that's my submission. So hold your expectation, moderate your expectation. Biden will still be the president of the United States, and the United States interests have not changed. Its outlook and its behavior towards us is not likely to change right now in any remarkable way. There might be change of style, but perhaps not much of substance. And that's my submission. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Professor Zondi. Deliberately, when I was introducing Professor Zondi, I did not tell colleagues that Professor Zondi is serving on the National Planning Commission of South Africa with a special focus on regional and international partnerships. He's also on the steering committee of the Council of International Relations, which advises the Minister of International Relations and Cooperations on International Affairs. Those are the things that he's doing. He's a professor at University of Johannesburg, and we are so humbled to have you here, Professor, to give us a view on US-Africa relations during the Biden's tenure. Currently, colleagues, the US has got about 29 army bases in Africa. 29. They've established around 29 army bases in Africa. And the US has put sanctions against Burundi, Congo, Mali, Libya, Zimbabwe, Somalia, South Sudan, and Central Africa. So there are countries in Africa that are facing the sanctions of from the US. And there are countries in Africa that has provided the US a space to establish the army bases. And one of those countries are very close to us in the SADC, and if I'm not wrong, is Botswana. And I stand to be corrected. Before a waste of time, I'll take inputs from colleagues and comments and questions that we need to discuss as this webinar. I can see the hand of Mr. Botsam Muilwa. Your hand is up. Can you come in, Mr. Muilwa, for your comment? Mr. Muilwa, your hand is up.
Sediko, am I audible?
You are audible. You're a little bit far, but you can try.
Okay, I'm using headphones. I just got out of the office. I am going to try and get out of the headphones because they tend to be a little bit problematic. But let me sincerely request the colleagues that if I am not audible enough, they must inform me. Then I will remove the headsets. I hear better with the headsets. And thanks for taking my hand. And let me appreciate one of the, a highly decorated scholars of international relations in South Africa, Professor Zondi. I've got a few differences with what he had tabled, but I appreciate his closing remarks that the face of the White House may have changed, but the policy of the United States of America towards particularly the Republic of South Africa will not change. It is the modalities and how they are going to implement their foreign policy that is going to make a difference. But let me correct Prof and say, when he said the engagements and the bilateral relations between the USA and South Africa, they've never been, on a high level. That is a little bit incorrect. If we would recall that during the Bill Clinton time, the Nelson Mandela era, going to the Thabo Mbeki era, the bilateral relations, the engagements, the discussions, the treaties that were signed between the two countries and the bilateral agreements were at high level, although they didn't bear too much fruits for us. But it ended that time. I'm of the opinion, as a former diplomat, that the relations between South Africa and the US, and I'm talking on bilateral level, deteriorated worstly under Barack Obama. Sadly, the person who was being seen as an African American, and they deteriorated very badly. But also, Sediko, you mentioned and or listed the number of countries that are under sanctions from the USA in Africa. If you look at those countries, those are the countries that are refusing to be puppets of the USA. Those are the countries that the USA is finding itself to be either uncomfortable economically and or militarily, that they are a risk to them. It is not because they have conducted themselves in what the US has termed a terrorist manner or a manner that is unbecoming to the United States. It is because they don't want to toe the line. Botswana, and you were correct, let me confirm, Botswana, for example, is showing the US line, having been a British colony, having better relations with the Great Britain, they have taught the line of the USA. And that's why the USA found it very, very comfortable from all the 15 SADC states that they should have military bases in Botswana. And they've always been there. They've been kept under wraps. They are being formalized now, and they are being expanded to can have a presence that the regional bodies like the SADC can recognize them in the African Union. And then you ask yourself, why would the USA want to have military barracks or military presence in a peaceful region like the SADC? And that should be very worrisome. But we know that with us as South Africa and with BRICS having have come to the fold, it was the biggest threat to the US. The BRICS and the BRICS Bank and the BRICS program, the relationships with the three giants of the world. India has the oldest and the longest serving democracy in the world. China is a super force, economic force that has now superseded the USA. And we know historically the political, the economic, as well as the intelligence relationship between Russia and the USA. So if you have three allies together, or three, non-friendly member states to the US teaming up with South Africa, which is seen as a bandwagon or a springboard to the African Union or to Africa, the US will be very worried. I think what Biden is going to do is going to try and manage and break down BRICS to its pieces, since it has actually already showing crumbling signs. And I think that is going to be part of his program, because that is his biggest threat, to can leave BRICS running, forth. But again, we spoke of Obama and Trump and the US being a democracy. I don't buy into that. The democracy in the United States of America, it's actually based on the opposite of Africa. In Africa and Asia, the democratic states are more dictatorial. But when you look at the US and other Western countries, like in Europe, it's more financial. Those with money, those with economic power, these are imperialist states. They tend to determine who will lead and govern the country. That's why it was very easy for Trump to trim me a few years back in 2016, and at the moment he lost the elections. It is all about money. It is all about economic power and control. And the mistake that Trump has done was not to continue what is the stimulant of the economic process of the USA. And the USA economy, we all know, it is dependent on its military muscle. And Trump, I argued with people on social media this afternoon to say, but Botswana, you are not telling the truth when you say Trump never started a war against any country. And I mean, doing that, they said he attacked Suleiman in Iraq and killed the Iranian leader and so forth. Those were insurgent attacks, if you know the military. Those were attacks on individuals and programs. But Trump administration never really bombed and attacked any country. That's one. Two, he did cut the military, foreign military spending, which has been a stimulus of the economy. He did cut it, but what he increased, it was the domestic military budget. Am I audible? Hello? Hello?
But you can continue and wrap up, please.
Okay, so I agree with Prof when he says we should not be excited as a nation that the policy of the USA will change or the behavior of the USA will change towards us as a bilateral country. But in multilateral forums, in the AU, in SADC, in the UN, AGOA, and all those programs that the US have towards Africa as a continent, they are going to do their level best to use South Africa as the springboard to infiltrate, to break the Chinese economic, infiltration in Africa. And their intention is to use South Africa. And we should not get excited and think we've got an economic foe in the USA. We don't. Prof, in conclusion, Prof earlier on when he wrapped up, he mentioned how the USA had programs towards South Africa that never materialized. And it's very simple. Those programs, they were not intended to benefit South Africa. That's why their investment in South Africa was imperialist-based. It was not to grow and develop manufacturing and industrial sectors. It was to extract and exploit the country and to try and penetrate Africa. And when South Africa did not play the ball, the USA had beautiful policies towards South Africa and they kept them backwards. And that's what happened. That's my input for now. Thanks, colleagues.
Thank you so much. I nearly said Prof. One day you'll be a professor. Any other inputs, questions from colleagues before I bring in Prof. Zondi? Moro Silishwele, you are on the floor. Moro Silishwele?
Thank you very much, Dr. Sediko. Thanks, Prof. I hope I'm audible. Can I proceed?
You can proceed, my brother.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Prof. Zondi, for the concise presentation. My question is, do you think there will be any meaningful material difference on the lives of African Americans or Africans in America if you compare how things were in the last couple of years, police brutality, recently kidnappings, white right-wing, radical elements, and the like? Do you think there's going to be any significant impact or change now that Biden will be at the helm of the White House? Or do you think it's business as usual, irrespective of whether it was the Trump? You used an interesting analogy earlier to say it's better the enemy who doesn't smile at you compared to the enemy who smiles at you. So please clarify whether you think African Americans will benefit anyway, and also the deputy president, I think she's half African, half Asian, or something to that effect. Do you see that as anything to celebrate at all? Or it's again, much like Obama, using a black face to again win the votes of African Americans in the States, and then ultimately nothing, they benefit nothing from the presidency? Thank you.
Thank you, Morosi. I'll take the last hand from Honorable Faith Motambi, and then I'll give back to Prof. Honorable Faith Motambi.
Thank you. You'll pardon me. I've got some network challenges. You won't see my picture. Greetings, Prof, and greetings to everyone who is participating in this engagement. I just need to link what the Prof has said in line with the need to refine the framework for US-Africa cooperation to keep up in Africa. Colleagues, you will all agree with me. There's this issue that you always read, the USAID's regional trade and investment hubs. And we are told they are here in Africa. In particular, they've got, it's here in our country, Ghana and Kenya. And then it said the objective is to deepen regional economic integration and then to promote a two-way trade with US under AGOA and attract investment that drives commercial expansion within the region and the global markets. Where I'm seated, facilitator, maybe I'm talking because I'm here in the village. That minimal impact that US aid is doing to the country, maybe for some of you who are staying in the cities can see that. Of late, there was this other program called the Yearly, the one for the youth that are taken through that program, young people as well. But then the same thing, it's like this is meant for the elites, the ones in cities. How then do we then make sure that also the rural poor, in particular rural women, rural young women, benefit out of this? Because it's on paper that there are this good cooperation that the US is doing in the country. And then they will hear them saying that their policies and programs towards Africa has been impactful. But from where we seated, diseases. Now you had your COVID-19 pandemic, the issue of HIV, AIDS, and hunger, and all those things. Then linking it with this, the Young African Leaders Initiative program, you find them reporting that they've trained over 400 of the next generation African leaders. But what is that the meaningful impact that then they will make sure that then we have prosperous communities in our communities, as I'm indicating. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Faith Motambi. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much. Maybe let me start with what Honorable Motambi has just pointed out. You are correct, Honorable Motambi, and it's a question that we must ask about all these big relationships, about the extent to which they cascade down to ordinary people and help us deal with the triple challenge of poverty, of inequality, and unemployment. And whether these relationships are simply meant to be nice display of relationship between the elite on both sides, which is why some companies can claim to benefit from the US PEPFAR, which provides funding in the health area. Few South African companies, because the US tend to use American companies in South Africa for all of those kinds of things. A few South African NGOs can claim to have benefited from the USAID development funding, which is quite significant, but tends to focus on what we call middle-class interests around human rights, around energy transitions, and all of those kind of things, but not quite on the basic life and death issues of the people on the ground. But Honorable Motambi, this also has to do with what we place on the table when the US place their issues on the table so that we agree on whatever it is. We need to strengthen how we ensure that we tilt the balance in favor of support that will have a bearing on people on the ground, rather than support that makes the relationship look good and therefore pander to our middle-class tastes and middle-class interests. So we have to work a little better at identifying things we would like them to use their cooperation money on, so that they don't just use it on what they wish, but they wish it on what we do. For example, if we tied their cooperation to the district model of service delivery, it would then be funneled into the areas that do that. Because if you don't do that, they will create their own model, which is parallel to the district model, to our own district model of development. Similarly, they would, if we tie the relationship, the whole relationship to the implementation of the National Development Plan, we're then able to make sure that whatever they put in supports what we're trying to do on the ground. We have been better at tying them into certain things on the African continent. For example, we had a very big relationship with the US promoting potato farming and potato planting, especially the drought-resistant potato in Lesotho. For 6 years, up to 2018, we had a big project where we agreed we would both support Lesotho, but South Africa insisted, let the Basotho themselves say what crop do they want to plant. And then we develop a program around that between South Africa and USAID. And South Africa will provide the expertise, will provide the scientists, the farmers, the agriculturalists, and the Americans will provide the technical expertise, but also to provide the funding for that. We're able to do that so that by 2018, Lesotho was able to plant, to increase its potato production more than 40%, by more than 40%, and therefore fight food insecurity in the outer lying areas of Lesotho. We did the same thing with the Americans as well on Angola. Again, it was an agricultural project and it related to beans, I think. It also was productive. So it was a huge project, it looked good, but it was about interest of the people on the ground. Because in all cases, new farmers emerged from the localities in the rural areas in Lesotho, in Angola. We did that. Now, if we can do that with the US in our relationship regarding countries, the neighboring countries, we should be able to do that in relation to bilateral with us here in South Africa and say, no, this whole support must be linked to addressing this sheep farming or whatever the case might be. Then we'll be able to measure. So there is an issue about how we ourselves manage that relationship. Very quickly with the others, Morosi, we're asking a very difficult, a very tough question. There's a whole lot of Black Americans who believe that the removal of Trump is to their interest, because it's been an insult to them. It does insult them in some cases and stuff like that. Doesn't look like it do that. But frankly, by the way, he's also done quite a bit for the African American community, partly in order to win them for votes. As way back as 2017, started what was called opportunity zones, pump money into those African American community, knowing that the Democrats knew how to speak nice about African Americans, how to hug them, but they never put money into that support. So the Democrats has been supported by the Black Americans for a long time, but whether the Democrats, whether the African Americans have benefited from that lending of support, voting for Bill Clinton, voting for Carter before that, voting for Obama, whether they've benefited from that, it is a question about it. Now, will the new people do better? When it was Clinton, we thought, no, it was still a white man. I mean, the Democrats, but it's still a white man. Perhaps when we have a Black man in the form of Obama, it would be a remarkable difference. Obama gave the Black Americans a sense of self-belief, which is very important, a sense of confidence in themselves, and made them feel that they are no longer some heritage of slavery, but they are full Americans themselves. But people do not eat confidence, do not eat hope, do not eat positivity, positive outlook, feel good about yourself. My worry is that Kamala Harris, as a Black woman, because in the US system, she is a Black woman born also with a Asian, what we call Indian in South Africa, with an Indian parentage as well, so black and Indian. So by being not white, many people are placing so much hope in them. Yet we have seen what happened under Obama, that it usually hope that leads to just them giving you hope. They usually never serious action to fundamentally transform the economy in the United States to include Black people, fundamentally transform the system so that you can remove systemic racism. My worry is that there are no new factors that suggest that Kamala Harris will perform better than Obama. She's already been called the female Obama. So whatever you think Obama achieved, perhaps that's what Kamala Harris will be able to achieve. And my sense is that there was very little concrete beyond feel good, beyond the morale and issue of that, partly because the United States is structured in a particular way. It's a system. It won't be transformed by one individual being placed in power. Like we've learned in South Africa, we can place somebody as a CEO of SAA. Unless you transform the entire structure of things, that very person will end up serving the old interest. You don't transform by changing the COO. You have to transform by changing the institutional culture of a thing. Then put a Black CEO in charge. That is what has frustrated us over a period of time. I agree with the first comment about the superficiality of change, and that we should be worried that those countries that have participated in that negative part of the US's relationship will continue. We also noticed one last point, and I see that Sharon is also raising that point, that the rand strengthened with the election of Biden. But when the rand strengthened, is it really about the interest of the poor, of your small business, of the Black business, of the township business, of the rural farmer and of the rural people? No, it is about people that the JSE, as you know, the JSE remains overwhelmingly white controlled companies. So when you see how the rand is responding positively, the rand is not us. The rand is the JSE people. So we must be careful about reading too much into that, because indeed, big business might make some inroads in this particular. But whether this big business will then translate those benefits to benefits, at least even just for entrepreneurs, Black entrepreneurs and township business and people on the periphery, it's questionable. Let me just take it there.
Thank you so much, Prof. He said that the rent is not us, it's for the big business. It's not when the rent strengthened, it's not strengthening in the interest of the poor, but those who are within the JSE. That's what he said. Any comments, hands from other colleagues? Comments, questions from other colleagues? Looks like our colleagues have got nothing much to add. Let me check comments from Facebook in the meantime, while colleagues are still thinking about the questions or comments that they can make. Check comments from Facebook. Colleagues, any comments, inputs? Moros Lishola, please come back again. You're free to come have a bite again.
All right, thank you very much, colleagues. Not to create a dialogue necessarily, but so my input is that I'll start first off by appreciating the response to my earlier question. And indeed, it will seem to me that what's happening now with pairing Biden with an African woman or a Black lady as the vice president is exactly aesthetics of politics, or politics aesthetics. nothing more to it necessarily. But what I would like to invite Prof to, say a bit something about in more detail is what Botsang mentioned earlier, and also what Sediko mentioned around the presence of the American military in Botswana. We know all too well about the presence of AFRICOM and other military and intelligence programs across the continent in West Africa mostly. What do you make of that, Prof? And what does that in turn say about Botswana's government and its bilateral relations with South Africa? Seeing that there's a new president, relatively new president in Botswana itself, how do we position ourselves diplomatically with Botswana? Because it would seem to me that, it's pandering to the West, it's dancing to the music of the West. Hence, all the development, human development indicators of Botswana are said to be quite high. Their currency is stronger than ours this side. It's said to be a great model of development. And I often argue that, in fact, those might very well be fabrications, because Botswana has for the longest time been dancing to the tune of the West. And so it has to be projected in that light as being a leader of Africa. So please, Prof, indulge us a bit more about the US-Botswana relations, South African relations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Morosi. Botsang, before we bring in Prof for the last round, Botsang. Mr. Muilo. Okay, Prof, you can go on while we're still waiting for Botsang. Prof?
Yes, the question of US militarization of Africa is a big question. Botswana is just mentioned as one factor. But the US, the last count we had, that they had over 28 countries that signed a special military agreement with them under what is called AFRICOM. Of course, the agreement they have with South Africa is of a lower level, but they still have agreement with South Africa. And they have agreement with 28 other countries of different nature and deeper relationships. So what is happening in Botswana is happening in 27 other countries on the African continent. So the response you have to what is happening to Botswana must be measured by how you respond to all the other 27 countries, because the continent has to have a united stance in relation to how do you manage the military relationship such that it does not become a form of the subversive relationship. We have military relationship with all manner of countries. It's normal. It's part of what is called defense diplomacy. It's okay. But there's a particular kind which enables the US to have installations in your country, which is now what is said to be happening in Botswana and various countries. It creates challenges because those installations, the US tends to use them in order to launch open or surrogate hidden military operations in those countries, including engineering regime change, including exporting conflict between countries. We still have an issue with the fact that the US uses an island stolen from Mauritius, the Chagos Island, next to Mauritius, an African island, uses it as an army base to launch wars all over Asia, Middle East, and parts of Africa. Now, for it to have bases on the African land, it's a huge affront, but it is also an indication of weaknesses on the African continent. You and I would remember that in the times of Obasanjo, Mbeki, that quartet of leadership, Bouteflika and others, they would have rallied the continent as 4 countries, rallied the continent so that the continent will have a common position and make it very difficult for the US to expand its military power. But now that we don't have that quartet of 4 or 5 countries that lead very seriously, they have a very strong African agenda, even South Africa. Africa's African agenda, its presence on Africa, kind of slid down over a period of time. In that point, it presents an opportunity, not just for the US, but also for Israel, and also for a few other countries to penetrate the African continent through military means, which is a real issue. Morocco has come back on the African continent, is sponsoring and supporting and buying other countries, dividing the continent. We know that others are doing. The Chinese are also here militarily. The Russians are here militarily. When you have so many armed groups in your territory, next to your yard, even if among them they are your friends, you've become insecure. So many of them stationed in Djibouti, which is a country in Africa, means, even if they are saying they're doing it for us, means that our security is no longer in our hands, it's in their hands. Should they have a government which is a crazy leader, they can actually turn those guns on us, because there are no, the outlook of a country right now is not guaranteed should its government change. What happens if the wrong guy gets into power? That capacity can be used against us. So it is a function also of the weakness of the Pan-African agenda and the Pan-African institutions, and the failure to establish fully those rapid response armed forces that Africa wanted to establish, those regional brigades for Africa, that create a space for these others to come in and say they are coming to help us. The fact that this conflict has continued in Mozambique for such a long period of time and we've all contained it, very soon a global power will be coming to help us manage it and do something else. So there is a real problem on our part as well.
Thank you, Prof. What you are saying in summary is that as long as we don't have a united Africa, speaking one voice will be used as a playing ground by foreign countries. They will establish whatever they want to establish. Utang, over to you.
Thank you, Sediko. Am I audible?
Very audible, Butang.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm sorry earlier on when you called me, technology was playing with me. But let me start with the last comment of Prof regarding the military presence of foreign countries in the continent. I know the topic today was the US towards South Africa, but we cannot talk of the US and South Africa without mentioning the African continent or the regional economic bodies like SADC, ECOWAS, and the EAC. Prof has kept it well, and I don't want to belittle it or to dwell much on it. To say the presence of our friends, those who smile with us, those who fund us, and those who pretend to be friends of Africa. And he mentioned Morocco as an example, which is an African country. It's the most dangerous thing our leaders have done politically, to allow foreign military presence in the continent. And you can see they are strategically positioned. One, they are in peaceful countries like Botswana, whereby in Botswana, if you know the military, it's almost non-existent. And that's why earlier on when I commented, I said, what is it that the US wants to do with military presence in SADC? And we know that SADC follows the United Nations principle of dialogue, of engagement, of negotiations, of peaceful resolutions to economic and political problems in the region. And we have seen it working in many countries despite challenges in Zimbabwe and Mozambique. SADC has done very well to maintain peace and stability in the region, and that's what the UN Charter provides for. But I think African leaders, and particularly South African leaders, should really look into the situation of whereby, as Prof said, if the war erupts in one of the African countries, and Mozambique, I can tell you, or Zimbabwe is one of the most potential at the moment because the insurgencies between Frelimo and Renamo in the northern part of Mozambique, like in Tete and all that, have resurfaced. And we may see this thing flowing into Kenya, into Somalia, and so forth. So that's what SADC should be focusing on. Instead of thinking that the United States of America and the UN will come and solve any problems and conflicts in the region. But what, let me go back to when I raised my hand. It's when the Honorable Minister, I'm a diplomat. There's nothing called an ex-minister, an ex-president. Protocol does not allow it. Mutambi raised the issue of agricultural and economic development in rural areas in Africa. And I want to say to Mutambi, why should the USA come and think, determine, and even to some extent, economically dictate to a country like South Africa and Lesotho on how we should farm potatoes and export them on international market and feed the nation, when actually it has been proven, and we all know that we have all basics for sectors of the economy, the land, the agriculture, the entrepreneurship, and the skills. You can farm those things without any foreign aid. Somebody earlier on, I can't remember who mentioned how the USA is pumping money into Africa, is pumping money into foreign aid into South Africa. For point of correction, South Africa is actually not on the green light of foreign aid. We are not regarded internationally as a country that is reliant or needs foreign aid as compared to Mozambique, Malawi, and other African states. Therefore, that's why I said earlier on, we are a springboard to can penetrate these countries. We don't need foreign aid as a country. We can be a self-sufficient nation based on the God-given natural resources. Our sun, why are we still farming coal? Why are we still mining coal? Why are we still relying on technology when we have the sun? Why are we still relying on foreign aid and the so-called, and I use the word facilitator, I use the word so-called very carefully, foreign direct investment, which in my books, it is actually foreign direct in exploitation of the minerals in our country to can be taken by companies like Anglo America to go to the US. Then we expect the US, who is the biggest imperialist in the world, to come and engage with us to say, now South Africa, let us talk. How can I aid you? And when I aid you, talk to your neighbor or your baby named Lesotho and Eswatini to be able to aid them. That's why Botswana, and colleagues, I'm saying this on record, that's why Botswana has a resistance towards South Africa. Our diplomatic relations with Botswana have never been warm. Ever since the dawn of our democracy, because Botswana sees us as the big brother. We want to be the big brother. And remember, Botswana is a puppet of the big brother of the world, of the USA. And now when a smaller big brother like South Africa wants to step in and tell Botswana what to do and dominate, Botswana will have resistance. Where does Botswana, be a landlocked country, get its resistance from? It gets its resistance from the military and the economic support they are getting from the United States of America. And why is America doing that? Keep them divided. As long as the world richest deposits of minerals, the biggest continent in the world, by all demographics, stays divided. That's when the imperialists like the USA and the Western Europe will flourish, because they're keeping us divided. You know, we have like over 50 states in Africa. We have 15 in SADC, and these 15 in SADC are completely divided. And that's how the imperialists thrive. Now, what should SADC do? SADC is supposed to sit down and look at economic trade between our member states instead of focusing on who is in power, who is a dictator, who is democratic, who's not democratic. And this democracy is being defied by the imperialists and the Western countries. And I think that's where the challenge is. We should focus on economic development in the region, in the continent, using the domestic God-given natural resources and skills that we have acquired as nations over 350 years of colonialism. We have the skills. We can run the economies in this continent instead of depending on imperialists who are exploiting our land. And we need leaders. We need the leaders in South Africa. We need the current sixth administration to stand up and say, USA, you have been promising and developing policies. Yet South Africa never benefited. We are putting our foot down. We have made new lovers in China. We have made new boyfriends or girlfriends in Russia. We want to concentrate on building economic relations with them than this dust piling documents that the US has promised the African leaders, and African leaders fell into that concept. I submit, Mr. Facilitator.
Thank you, Botswana. Before I bring in and Prof, in 2013, the foreign direct investment from US to Africa, what Mr. Mulo is calling it a foreign direct exploitation. In 2013, it was about 60 billion rand. In 2016, it went to 49 billion rand. Last year, it was around 43 billion. Prof, do you see the increase in the foreign direct investment in Africa because of the new US administration? Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much. I will not add any more to what was already said in relation to the Botswana issue. With regards to the investment issue, of course, a relationship that is open to dialogue means that South Africa has an opportunity to make its point in a strong way and perhaps increase investment. South Africa investment with Europe and with the US has been growing consistently over a period of time, if you look at it on average. But it is what Honorable Tambo was raising earlier, which would be critical question is, what kind of investment and investments benefiting who, and how do we on the South African side condition the investment so that they go to where we need it most, to fire up entrepreneurship, to fight poverty and inequality, to create employment in areas that need employment. It's not Santin that needs employment most, but it's Alexander. It is not Umhlanga that needs employment most, it's Inanda. It is not Rondebosch that needs employment most, it's Kukuletu. So how do you get a situation where you use your power as a government to condition the direction of whatever investment we are able to win, so that that investment addresses the people that we need most? Even if that relationship isn't that warm, but at least you condition the investment to go where it matters. But it's the same question we asked in relation to China as well. Put so much money on the South African economy, but we allow it to go to Standard Bank. So the money goes into investment with Standard Bank. But Standard Bank, of course, has customers all over. But could those billions be split between various sectors and support businesses that are actually profitable and durable and sustainable on the periphery of the South African society? I think that is a question of leadership on our part, because opportunities will come, but whether those opportunities meet our most important needs has to do with how we use that relationship with Biden, that relationship with Kamala Harris, that relationship with the new US, in order to increase the benefits where the benefits are needed most, not just to the JSE, not just to Santin. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Prof. Colleagues, we are closing now. And with all the submissions that have been made today, we are aware that the change of people in office does not necessarily mean the change of the way relations are going to be managed. Prof said the US presidents don't author US global interest. This already pre-exists. So we should not be so much excited and pumped up and say, because the Trump has lost elections and now there's a new person in White House that is going to benefit Africa or South Africa in particular. That is the submission. We will just have to observe what will be happening. What we require is a strong leadership in Africa that will engage the foreign countries with one voice, raising the interest of African countries. Botsang raised the important fact of saying we are one of the richest continent in the world in terms of mineral resources, but yet the poorest. What we lack is decisive leadership to ensure that we move the masses of our people who are into poverty, from poverty to prosperity. Thank you, colleagues, for joining our sessions tonight. We really appreciate your participation. Thank you, Prof, for accepting the invitation in a very short notice. We sent you an invitation last night and you quickly responded and accepted that you will participate. Okay, you're disturbing. I was saying thank you, Prof, for accepting our invitation. We sent you an invitation last night and you quickly accepted. We really appreciate. We understand that you are very busy, but when coming to issues of politics and international relations, you are always available to share your knowledge with us. Colleagues, thanks to everyone who participated in this session. The next session that we are going to have is this Saturday, 11 o'clock. Our focus will be the transformation of the judicial system in South Africa. There's been a cry that our judicial system is not transformed. We have lined up the speakers. This Saturday, we meet in the same webinar to look at the transformation of the judicial system. 11 o'clock this Saturday. Thank you so much, colleagues. Please take care and have a lovely evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sediko and Prof. Thanks a lot, and the participants.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Prof. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks.